everyone. I'm Pam Tompkins from SET Solutions, and I want to welcome you to our new series here. And we're going to be talking this year about standards and specifically electric power safety standards. We're going to be talking about, what some of those standards are. We're going to talk about why you need to use standards and pretty much how you go about doing that. We have a lot of people calling us trying to figure out, all right, I'm brand new to the electric power industry, so what do I do? How do I manage through this whole concept? A lot of our clients have folks that might have worked out in the field with field positions for years, and now they're coming into electric power safety facilitators, or there might be folks that just want to learn more about how to address standards in electric power organizations. So we're going to be breaking all that down and trying to make it a whole lot better and a whole lot easier to understand. I want to kind of start out with some basics and some fundamentals here on this very first part of the presentation. I want to start out with the concept of, looking at the various types of standards that we use in electric power. So the first one, of course, is regulatory, and I want to talk through that in just a few minutes. But there's another type of standard that we use in electric power, and we use it very extensively, and that is consensus standards. So I want to actually point out some consensus standards that absolutely, if you're not utilizing them, I would absolutely start looking at some of these standards. And then the last thing is pretty much some industry best practices. And industry best practices, there's quite a few things that go into that, and I want to kind of break some of that down. So let's start out with the regulatory piece of that. And when I talk about regulatory, I really want to kind of set the stage. Most of the time, I would say that the majority of the time, regulatory standards are based on law. And I hear a lot of people say, well, regulatory is best practices. Not really. It's regulatory law. So that means when OSHA, and I'm going to use OSHA, and you can see it here, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, when they come out and they promulgate standards, that means in your organizations, then you have to comply with what that standard is telling you. Now, up front, I'll tell you that's difficult sometimes to know how in your organizations to do that. But OSHA is the first piece of regulatory that we will be talking about. And by the way, I'm also going to break down over the next probably 12 months or so, I'm going to break down some electric power standards. I'm going to break them down. I want to talk about some very specific things in the electric power world. And a lot of us in electric power have always understood and knew that there was a regulation called OSHA 1910-269, and it's been known as the 269 standard. So I'm going to break that down and see how it aligns with the construction standard, which is 1926 subpart V. So we'll be looking at that over the next months. Come back and check us out on that. The second piece of this is the consensus standard side of the house. And from the consensus standard, there are two very large standards that in electric power that we certainly utilize. And the first one that we're showing here is the National Electrical Safety Code. Now, I also want to break that down just a little bit over the next 12 months or so. Talk to you just a little bit about what the NESC is. Ways that you can utilize that within your organizations, and so on. So the next very large standard in electric power and very horizontal electric organizations also utilize this particular standard, and it's the NEC, which is the National Electrical Code. So we'll talk about the differences between those two codes. If you're in an electric power organizations, you have to readily understand what the provisions are of both of those standards. So we will be talking about both of those standards. The next one is the ASTM International, and I'll tell you that there is a particular committee that I'd like for us over the next 12 months to kind of break down, and that's the F18 committee. In that F18 committee is electrical protective equipment. There's a lot of information in there. It gives a lot of good information that you can utilize in your electric power organizations. We're going to be talking about that. And then kind of the last one, a lot of us in any industry that we've worked in most likely have heard of ANSI standards. In ANSI standards, we think of that as in protective eyewear, we think of it protective hard hats, and so on. There's a lot more to ANSI standards, but we will do some breaking down of the ANSI standard also. Now, the last piece of this that I want to address here today is kind of the best practice, industry best practice. And I tell clients all the time that certainly regulatory is law, you got to know what it is, but most people in electric power organizations, whether you work in a utility or you are a contractor that supports that utility, your best practices are going to be much higher than regulatory standards. So there are a couple things that I want to just point out here. We'll talk more about it. Is if you've not had an opportunity to go out and look at the partnership, and a lot of folks in electric power call it the Electrical Transmission and Distribution Strategic Partnership. It's a partnership with OSHA that a lot of the large contractors, IBEW and so on, have gone into a partnership and said, hey, if you do these things, these are very much industry best practices. They're much greater than what regulatory language says. And then the last piece of this in the best practice side is your company-specific safe work rules. I definitely want to break that down over the next 12 months because what you will see is that you, hopefully in your organizations, are always striving to look at improvement. And if you're looking at improvement, you're going to be building very strong work practices to kind of go along with this. So we'll also kind of break that down. I want to thank you for taking your time, and please come back to the rest of the sessions. We'll actually be posting those as we go. Here in just a little while, we'll probably have several of these up, but please feel free to give us a call also. Thank you very much.